Hello, everybody. Welcome to GVN Live. Sorry we're a week behind, but we're going to make up for it. We got a really interesting show going on today. It's going to be a first for us. We're going to be doing our first live top 10, and today our top 10 list is going to be MMORPGs, and it is not in any particular order. We are not ranking them. We're just listing 10 of our favorites amongst the three of us that we have played. On top of that, we're also going to be going into a brief discussion about Club Penguin, which was shut down by Disney, the private servers anyway. In fact, I'm just surprised that the game was still running. It was shut down a few years ago, I thought. But aside from that, ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce you to the casting crew. We have the always energetic Lolly Rose to my right. And then we got down here in the corner, looking dapper as always, Mr. Mark B. Writing. How are you, Mark?
Technically, that's to your left.
I mean, fair.
Well, that's my left, but what the people see on the screen, it looks like it's to my right, but whatever.
Oh, good. We're gonna semantic directions at the beginning of the show again. This is fine.
I'm the fucking director. Let's just do it as I call. Anyway, but anyway, Jen, how are you today?
I'm good.
So what have you been up to? What have you been playing?
Been kind of bouncing between a couple of things. My Monday streams have been pretty much dedicated to completing Final Fantasy VII Remake. I just made it to Wall Market last night, so that's
The best
super
part of the
fun.
game, in my opinion.
One of the best parts, absolutely. And then I've been kind of bouncing between like Animal Crossing and Valorant, so it's been fun.
Yeah, I don't know anything about Valorant. Tell me a little bit about that.
Let's take CS:GO, Siege, and Overwatch, and like let them all have a child together. That's pretty much what Valorant is. It's a little bit more fast paced than like a traditional CS:GO match because of the abilities. But it has the same kind of buy system and like get to point A, point B, point C, depending on the map, and plant bomb, and then protect bomb, kind of rotational gameplay that you would get from like either Siege or CS:GO. I feel like and the only reason I add Siege into it is just because I feel like it has a bit more tactics to it than you would with like just CS:GO, which is push point, protect point, rotate as necessary. With this, there's a little bit more tactics to it because of the types of weapons that you can have. Until like everybody either has an operator or an Ares, and then at that point it's pretty much a free for all. So it's like, all right, that's fine, I guess.
Yeah. So, sounds interesting. Although I have to say, I'm not really much of a fan of CS:GO. I played a little bit of Counter Strike, 15 years ago. It was all right. It wasn't for me. It was. I guess I wasn't the target demographic, but hey, people love it. So.
I mean, CS:GO as a baseline is a lot more simplistic because it's pretty much just get to point, try not to die, and or get to point and kill everybody that's on it. Whereas um, with Valorant, it's more about the tactical nature of can I use my abilities to get to certain points to flank, or do we just go all in and push, kind of like you would with like Siege? Because having with Siege you have abilities. The same thing is true with Valorant, where you don't have any of that with CS:GO. It's purely just run and gun and or just deal with your gunplay, and that's really the only major problem or the major differences between the two, honestly.
Oh, sorry about that.
No worries.
Alrighty. So anyway, Mark, what have you been up to, sir? What have you been playing? What has been keeping you busy?
Phantasy Star 4,
Oh, you went back in time, huh?
I guess. It's like I bought Sakura Wars and I played that for like I don't know 15 hours.
How are you liking it?
Oh. Um, I'd
It's
probably
not
like it
It's
better if
not
I
the
didn't.
strategy game, but it's action based. But
Well, it's like here's the thing about Sakura Wars. Like here's the dirty little secret that people who like Sakura Wars generally don't want to admit. You aren't playing Sakura Wars for the fucking gameplay.
Nope.
No, like Sakura Wars as a strategy game is butts. You know, it
Well,
was never a good strategy game.
I technically thought it was a great strategy game series, especially when they evolved it in Sakura Wars 3 and 4.
The AI has always been dumb in that game, though.
Well, enemy AI, yes.
Right. So it's like it's you know it's definitely not the best. The one game that we got in the U.S. So Long My Love was the worst of the lot as far as the tactical elements of the game are concerned. But like Sakura Wars in general has never been the game that you played if you like gameplay in your visual novel. So this game is, you know, it's a good visual novel with shitty Dynasty Warriors attached to it.
Oh, good.
Like, I don't hate it. It's fine, you know, but it's like, you know,
It's not
6
Sakura
hours of
Wars.
talking for 8 minutes of combat. So it's sort of like it's not like the worst. It's like I'm being a little bit hyperbolic here. It plays okay-ish, I guess. But it's you know, 6 hours of talking for 8 minutes of combat. And
Yeah.
you very much have to enter into the game knowing that, because if you don't, you're going to be pissed. Like you're going to hate it.
No, for sure.
Well, you have to know that because it's labeled as a visual novel style dating game, but on top of that, I mean, if there's one thing that I like that's going for this right now, and I have been playing a lot of the English translation of the first Sakura Wars game, I have to say that what really keeps you in tow with the game is that the characters are really likable, and that's what I like about Sakura Wars right now, is that I really like all these characters.
I feel like you linked me that, and then I forgot to download it. Do you still have a link to that?
I think I linked you to the patched ISO file that I gave you, but I can link it to you again.
Oh, I may have it in my downloads, then I don't know what the fuck I did with it. But yeah, because I was thinking about that. I was like, I should really go back and play that. But yeah, I decided to play Phantasy Star 4 instead for some reason.
I mean,
I don't know
it's
why.
a great
I was just
RPG,
like-
so
It is. It absolutely is. I just started playing it for some reason. I was like, I don't know what inspired me to go back and start doing it. It's on the mobile phone, along with 2 and 3, and it was just like, oh, I can install this and I can play it. And I've been playing it for like 2 or 3 days now, and I'm like mostly done with it.
Can I just say how much I like the fact that you said it's on the mobile phone, and I think
It's
that's
on
amazing.
The mobile phone.
The mobile phone. It's how you said it, like the pause, and I'm just like, yes, that's Mark.
The mobile phone.
Yep. It just
And that's
is.
what it is. That is what it is. Janice. It is the mobile phone.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I don't appear to have that fucking thing. So if you could send me another link to it, I would appreciate it. I don't know if I just didn't download it the first time or what.
yeah, I'll double check my Google Drive if I have it there.
Okay.
Speaking of mobile, a couple years ago, you know, they released Elder Scrolls Blades. Well, they just quietly released it on Switch, and way to fuck it up, Bethesda. I mean, you have a decent mobile game right here, with microtransactions, I will point out, but it's a very playable game, and it's in the form that it comes. It's a dungeon crawler that's very basic, but still quite enjoyable, with you having to be able to rebuild your town and whatnot. Did you beat the Nintendo, sweetie?
Yeah. How you doing there, champ? How you doing there, champ? Did you are you winning at your games there?
But their port for the Nintendo Switch, they do two things wrong. The attack buttons are attached to the shoulder button, so you swing left and swing right by holding the triggers, and they completely remove any touch screen controls whatsoever for when the system is not docked. Why?
Nintendo Switch. Hey guys, we totally put a touchscreen on the actual device. Never makes a game that actually uses the touchscreen functionality. Thanks, Nintendo.
I mean, I have a game
I
have
gonna
Boaz,
fucking
and
take
it
the
uses the
goddamn thing
touchscreen, and the Project Diva Mega 39 came out, and they released a patch for the Japanese version 2 months ago that allow you to play with the touchscreen, but it's not there for this version of the American version of the game, which I don't understand why. Why aren't you people using the damn touchscreen?
Because we're unintuitive mongoloids.
It's like when the
If we're
Nintendo
talking
DS.
if we're talking about the Switch version of the game, I can tell you exactly why people aren't using the touchscreen.
Because
Nobody in the States takes it out of the dock, bro.
Right. I don't fucking take it out of the goddamn dock. Joel doesn't take it out of the goddamn dock. Sean does, but only when he comes over here and when he goes on the train to go to work.
Yeah,
But most of the people I know do not take it out of the fucking dock. It is like, here's the thing is, if you are designing this specifically that way, great, but you also need to come up with an alternative way of playing it for people who don't want to fucking just play your game with the touchscreen. Because that console heavy as hell.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sitting here for my fucking leisure time to play a video game. I ain't trying to be lifting weights and shit. Get the fuck out of here.
Oh well. Aside from that, I've been playing more PSO2. I mean, I'm really enjoying how far I'm getting in the game. I mean, it's amazing what I can do when I actually can understand the game in English. I mean, the English patch was doing a nice job, but there were some things that I just didn't understand what I was doing because they didn't translate those important, facts that you had to know about, like when it came to feeding pets or having to upgrade weapons and stuff like that. Like, I didn't really understand that concept very well on the Japanese servers, but now I actually have it understood. I go crazy with my daily missions and daily quests and all that stuff, and I'm having more fun now than I did when the game came out fucking 7 years ago. So, and now the PC version was announced coming out next week on May 27th. So, hope you people are happy. And I'll tell you right now who isn't happy. A bunch of pedophiliac Nazis. Nintendo announced that they are shutting down or have shut down all the private servers for Club Penguin and...
Disney, you mean?
Huh?
Disney?
Disney. What did I say?
You said Nintendo.
Nintendo. Right, because I was talking about... Yeah.
And it's basically the same thing. It's fine.
Yeah.
61 half dozen of the other. Really.
Disney's going to own Nintendo in like 3 years anyway. It's fine.
That's probably not wrong.
But yeah, so Disney shut down Club Penguin due to constant allegations and, well, proof of tons of racist remarks, pedophile remarks, and just some of the worst that was just going on in their chat rooms. And I thought this game was shut down 3 or 4 years ago, and it's still running. Why was it still running? So
presumably because people can run private servers of whatever they want.
Yeah, I mean, there's been, private servers for World of Warcraft for just about as long as the game has been around. The thing about WoW is, there's actually an open source program that they were able to, take a dump of the servers once they actually got the blades. If you remember many, many years ago, over a decade ago, Blizzard did a charity stream when they upgraded some of the servers for some of the original vanilla launch servers, and a couple of people got a hold of one of those blades and dumped all of the server architecture into a program that can be run on your desktop with just a little bit of SQL knowledge. So, this kind of stuff is commonplace for people that want a game to exist outside of the norm. I mean, City of exists, again, purely because of private servers. So to say that there's a private server of Club Penguin doesn't shock me.
Yes, but now with the fact that they're private servers, though, usually they're locally run on somebody's, home server or an off a server somewhere else. How does Disney have access to shutting down all these private servers?
They're Disney.
First of all, it's Disney, yeah. Second of all, private servers are generally publicly listed on websites. That's how a lot of people figured out how to get a hold of private servers for World of Warcraft, especially in its heyday. once like Wrath of the Lich King was over, everyone wanted to go back to vanilla. Everyone wanted to continue to play in vanilla and Burning Crusade and Wrath content without having to progress further. So in order to do that, a lot of people got that server architecture and started posting on publicly listed websites that you could just Google anywhere. And eventually you get to a point where somebody from the company that runs that game is going to find that listing. And then all of a sudden, now you've got cease and desist orders, you've got shutdown requests, you've got problems from the actual company, threatening lawsuits because of intellectual property theft. So it becomes very easy for people to find these kinds of things, especially in specific social circles. If you're talking about people that are die hard about being able to find a way to be both anonymous and active in an online avatar-based environment, it's very easy for people to find out how and where to actually go by just doing real simple Google searches. I mean, you just Boolean a couple of specific phrases in, and boom, there you go.
Yep. I just now have this image popping up in my head of Mickey Mouse from South Park just showing up at just some random dude's house that's running a Club Penguin server with a baseball bat. Oh, time to shut you down, motherfucker! Whoop! But,
Okay.
It's funny because it's probably not wrong.
I mean, sure, it's just I was not prepared for Robert's Mickey Mouse voice.
Oh, time to pay the piper, motherfucker!
Don't do that. Very weird. It makes me feel uncomfortable.
Oh.
Oh, what's the matter, Mark? Don't you like my voice?
I will fucking disconnect from this goddamn chat right now, you piece of shit. Don't think I won't do it.
I mean, that's no better or worse than me just coming onto the show and being like, Oni-chan.
Although I think Mark would find that a lot more acceptable than, some evil mouse overlord.
I mean, that's fair.
Just the way that you do that is no. Look,
Uncanny Valley almost.
no, I just want to protect my butthole when you say that.
Yikes forever. Hey, I gotta go actually take care of helping with the groceries really quick because I didn't realize how long he was gonna be gone. So I will be right back.
Yeah, by the time you're back, I'll either be dead or I'll have recovered.
6 of 1. I'll be back real quick.
Oh boy! So before we get on to the list, I guess we'll take some time out to maybe mention a couple of honorable mentions now as we move on from the Nazi Penguin discussion. So we got it didn't take us that long to compile this list. Pretty much we each made our own top 10 list of games, and we just whatever duplicates we had were automatically on the list, and then we discussed what we thought would fit well on the list through a vote, and then I guess we have some leftovers. So hey Mark, why don't you go ahead and talk about a couple of your MMOs that did not make the list for runner-up?
I mean, the problem with a lot of this is it's stuff that I remember playing and enjoying at the time, because I played a lot of MMOs, but I haven't necessarily put months and months and months and months and months into all of these MMOs. So it was I made a list knowing that, a lot of these games were not going to be selected because nobody else had played them but me. So it's I don't necessarily have a lot to talk about with them.
Yeah.
Like Earth and Beyond was on my list, for example. I played that for, I want to say, about a month when it came out.
Mm-hmm.
And, I remember how it worked mechanically and structurally. You basically... Okay, apparently I do have those, apparently I do have those after all.
Alright.
I just didn't have an emulator to run them. But, anyway... so yeah.
I'll hook you up with the emulator after the game or after the show.
No, I have it.
Yeah.
I just.
It takes a specific version of SSF to run it, though. So.
I got Yabanshiro 3.1.3.
That I don't think that's ever been updated. I don't think that's been updated in 10 years.
I mean, they have a thing on GitHub, so I would imagine it must have been. They also have a version of it for the Switch.
Oh, well,
So,
when the Polymega comes out, I'll be able to apply the patch to the Japanese version of the game. So,
oh, there you go.
yeah. So, I mean,
But
I already have it. I already have the translated ISO, but I can just put the Japanese disc in there now, and I'm just waiting for part 2 to get translated.
yeah, I was talking to Joel about that with the translation and also the Fantasy Star translations.
Mm-hmm. Oh
He
yeah.
was like, "Didn't they translate those?" And I was like, "Yeah, they weren't necessarily as good as the originals in certain ways. I keep meaning to finish them,
You're,
but
you're talking
like
about
there's just
Generations, right?
yeah,
Actually, they just announced on PS Cave that group of people, and I'm part of the PS Cave Discord, that they're going to do a new translation project for Generations 2.
was the first one bad or something?
I guess it wasn't as accurate as it could have been, I suppose, is what they were saying.
Okay, I guess. I don't know. It doesn't bother me, but
Yep.
I haven't played Generations 2 yet because Generations 1, like I said, is just way too flag centric for my tastes mechanically.
Mm-hmm. She has
Uh,
returned.
Sorry.
yeah, Jane just deactivated for like 5 minutes there.
You know what? When you deactivate your avatar, she just look like she's shut down for the night. Yeah, like that. Put a little bit of drool outside on the side of the mouth as you're sleeping.
I mean, that's more or less how she looks regardless.
Yeah.
Wow. But yeah, going back to the whole point, it was like Earth and Beyond. I distinctly remember it was a MMORPG where you would play as whatever toon you created, but like you mostly didn't see them except when you were on space stations. Most of the time, you saw yourself in your spaceship as you were flying around. If you wanted to go to a location, you would just tap it on the warp map, and it would just send you there. But you could be yanked out of warp if like pirates were in the way and wanted you to fight or something of that nature,
Mm-hmm.
and then you just completely fly off of the warp paths if you wanted to go like mine for resources or fight dudes or whatever.
Now,
Like
was
I
Earth
played
and
that
Beyond
for
based on the TV show that came out in the late 90s?
I no, it came out in the early '90s.
Okay.
Well, like early to mid '90s, I guess. It came out like a couple of years after EverQuest. It was as far as I'm aware, it was a different thing. I don't recall it being based on the show in any meaningful way. It was fun for the time, but like I just can't remember much of it beyond flying around in space. And I wish it had been better than it was, but I find I say that about a lot of old MMORPGs.
Hmm.
But I mean, like, for another example, like SMT Imagine is on my list, and I enjoyed playing that because it was a Mega 10 style MMO, and you could convince the little tunes to join you in battle and summon them up to deal damage to others. And it's I played it for probably about like a month, but I did not make any kind of marked or measurable significant progress in it, such that I could be like, well, it was like this or it was like that. Like
Mm-hmm.
the stuff that I picked to talk about is the only stuff that I've made any significant progress in game wise.
Okay. But by the way, Jan, we were talking about maybe at least mentioning a couple games from each of us that are runner-ups that didn't make the list,
Oh.
but we'd like to mention it. So we were doing that while
For
you were
sure.
gone. So yeah, why don't you go ahead and go?
So I think I've got two. So a lot of people that know me know that I love tactical, like RPGs in general. So like Final Fantasy Tactics and Tactics Ogre and like that whole like late 80s, like late 90s, early 2000s style like of games that like were really popular around the end of the PS1, early PS2 era. And the two MMOs that I don't think they actually made the list, but were definitely like two of my runners ups were Dofus, which was a French company, believe it or not, that made a bunch of like small animated shorts about all these different races and stuff that came together in this world where, like, as they created this MMO, had basically turn-based tactical combat where you would have your character, and if other people came in, like other people could join your fight within like 30 seconds of activating the fight, and it would allow you and anyone else that joined you to be in a party to like take out the enemies that you had aggroed, based on being on like a square tactical grid in some sort of like an isometric view. And everyone would have their own abilities and everyone would have their own tactics to actually take out all of the enemies on the map, and then everyone would take in a share of the loot based on how many people were there and what type of loot was available for each of those enemies. The other one that I think would be kind of similar but was a little bit more party based, was Atlantica Online. It was basically the same premise where it was tactical turn-based combat, but instead of having like others be able to join you like it was in Dofus, you had a full team that you would create, and it had a gacha style system of character grabbing where your team would start off with like a basic fighter, a basic archer, a basic healer, and a basic tank, and like you would gacha in cities to quote unquote recruit new members for your party, or if you had a specific type of player class, you could also like recruit monsters to join your party so that they would fight with you as you leveled up. And I thought both of those games had like really interesting combat systems, but because of the limitations of the system and the just sheer unmarketability of a lot of tactical style turn-based combat systems for an MMO, which a lot of people wanted to be more, I guess, active in around that time frame, the games just really didn't pan out all that well. I think Dofus is still running as of right now, but I don't know about Atlantica. I'm pretty sure that was a Korean one and it didn't last very long.
Okay. For me, on my list, I'm actually going to go outside of the 10 that I presented, just because there's a couple I knew that wasn't going to make it on the list. I didn't even think they were strong enough to make it on the top 10, but just I thought they were unique enough that they should be mentioned. One of them is Warhammer Online. I was a sucker for this game. It's a really good MMO that's based off of the the tabletop action board game of the same name. You just look at the game and you can see so much care that went into it from Mystic Studios when it came to handling the lore and creating the realm versus realm system that they had in there for the combat and the guilding. And it was just a fun game that I really enjoyed. I mean, people were kind of like knocking on it, calling it an absolute 100% WoW clone. I'm just like, whatever. You go ahead and enjoy what you want.
There's reasons for that.
I know there's reasons for that, but at the same time, though, I mean, it was doing something like PvP wasn't really a thing at WoW at the time when Warhammer Online came out. Not onto the scale of which that Warhammer was doing it either. So that I enjoyed. I enjoyed, the constant, getting into a party of like 30 or 40 plus people for raids, going up and trying to capture territory and stuff like that, which gives you all kinds of buffs and loot and all kinds of amazing things. It was a fun game. It's I was ashamed to hear it got shut down because I really enjoyed it. I probably didn't give it as much love as I should have, but I want to play it again, so I'm probably gonna check out a private server at some point that is still running. And another game, I'm going to give a shout out to probably one of the first free-to-play MMOs I've played, and that's Last Chaos Online. It's a very bare-bones like MMORPG that was brought to us first by Area Games back in I think 2003 or 2004 is when I played it. That's when I started getting into the MMO games. Absolutely bare-bones, but at least it got me interested in playing MMOs. From there is where I started experimenting, playing games like WoW and the first Guild Wars game and all that stuff. Trying to find that niche of MMORPG that I can enjoy, it hasn't aged well, I can tell you that right now. It's changed hands a couple times. I think it's owned by Potato Games. I'm not sure now. It's definitely not owned. The license is not owned by Aria Games anymore, that's for sure. But aside from that, though, so I think it's time we move on to the list. So I don't have any fancy intro for like I normally would. I didn't really have much time to prepare for that. Actually, I kind of didn't care at the same time. So we're going to be going in a unique order. It will be usually me, followed by Mark, followed by Jan. I will be going first and last in this entire list. And like I said before, in this list, no particular order. There is no game that's rated higher than the other. All personal opinion games that we felt that were strongly, all that we felt were strong enough to be on this list of 10 great MMORPGs. So to start off, let's introduce the first game on the list, and that is going to be a very unique one. This is Granado Espada, Sword of the New World. This is a unique Korean MMORPG that was brought to us back in the mid-2000s. It was originally brought over by G Potato, I believe, was the company at the time. It's also, of course, has switched hands numerous times, and there's actually 2 versions that are available of it on Steam. I'm still not sure what is the difference between both versions of the game, to be honest, but what I love about this game, and what makes it stand out the most, is the fact that you start off with what is called a family system. You have 3 characters of which you can control in a unique fashion, and that opens up the game to a whole slew of, like, strategy elements and whatnot in order to a whole slew of strategies in order for you to survive, because this game is relentless. This game, as most Korean MMOs are back in the mid-2000s, were grind heavy, meaning you will be doing nothing but fight monsters every step of the way when you are in action areas or action zones. The game has this remarkably beautiful Victorian graphical style, and to this day it still looks great, even though maybe a little low res. I love the character designs. I love the designs of the towns and how well they look. It's just very eye-catching. It pops. It's very unique. The music is give or take, but really what you're here for is the non-stop action. And if you love grinding in your MMOs, then Granado Espada is definitely the game for you. And it's a very unique one at that. And while it hasn't exactly stand the test of time, it's still a unique game to play. So with that, though, we're going to move on to Mark for his game, and he is going to be talking about Final Fantasy XI. Number 9.
I love Final Fantasy XI, but I also fucking hate the game so goddamn much.
You're not wrong, and I think pretty much everybody that's played 11 can consent to that.
Final Fantasy XI is that love-hate game.
So here's the thing, right? Final Fantasy XI, excuse me, was Square Enix's, well, Square at the time, I believe, first attempt at doing an MMORPG, and it was basically EverQuest with the serial numbers filed off. Fine. EverQuest, even now, is kind of this. It's good for the time that it came out, but it doesn't hold up particularly well. And Final Fantasy VII is sort of in the same boat. It very much was a case of you would make a character, and then you would just kind of send them out into the world to do whatever. There wasn't really a proper quest chain in the grand scheme of things. Like, there were specific quests that you could accomplish, but you generally didn't need to touch them to do the proper leveling as the game was designed to accommodate. Like, there was like quests to upgrade your rank as a character, and you could just completely ignore that shit if you did not want to use the airships for anything. And the quests themselves frequently involved getting an alliance of 18 players together and going into the bottom of some horrible dump in the middle of buttfuck nowhere to touch some stone. It was not the most intuitively designed MMORPG. The thing is that Final Fantasy XI sticks with me as a game because it had a lot of really ambitious ideas for the time that a lot of MMORPGs, even now, still don't do anything with. You would just create a tune at that point, and that tune could perform any of the jobs that were available in the game. Now, you had to get to a certain level to unlock certain jobs, which is consistent with how other Square Enix games have been, including the online Final Fantasy XIV and the various job system-based Final Fantasy single-player games. But here's the thing: you weren't locked into just having one toon with one job and leveling them up, and then if you wanted to do a different job, well, you'd have to fucking grind up a whole new character. So it was very much a case of, if I decide, well, I want to be a white mage now, I can just change to that and level up that job. I don't have to have 12 different characters when I can just have one character who can do all of the tasks. They also had the sub-job system, which allowed you to attach a job as a secondary function, which would allow that secondary job's skills up to a certain level to be accessible to the primary job. So I predominantly played as a paladin. I would usually assign warrior as my sub-job because it had the provoke skill, which you basically needed if you wanted to tank in that game. The game also just had a real sense of style about it that a lot of JRPGs, or a lot of MMORPGs, I should say, at that time didn't really have. Like, Ultima Online, your EverQuest, whatever. Even now with like your World of Warcraft, like they have their interesting concepts, but they all kind of just look like, somebody filed the serial numbers off of like J.R.R. Tolkien shit. You know what I'm saying? It all kind of has a very similar aesthetic to one another. And for the time, Final Fantasy XI was very, very different. I still don't like the fact that I had to spend a month in the fucking crawler's nest, but yeah, if you played the game, you know exactly.
Dunes.
Yeah, fucking drop dead baking in the fucking desert sands of the fucking Valkyrie Dunes. Jesus Christ. See,
right.
I never had problems with Valkyrie Dunes because I played as a tank and people always wanted me in their parties. But yeah, if you were a DPS, fuck you.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's the game was less than ideal in a lot of respects. But it's the first JRPG I really committed like 2 years of my life to playing. So I mean, it just fundamentally impacted how I view MMORPGs as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
But with that, we would move on to the next game on the list, which should be Jan with Phantasy Star Online 2.
Okay, where do I start? So for a 9-year-old game, this game still holds up surprisingly well. The reason is because it is much less an actual traditional MMO and much more of an action RPG. However, the fact of the matter remains that as a sort of predecessor, Phantasy Star Online and its subsequent additional add-ons and or other iterations in episode 2, episode 4, Phantasy Star Universe. Phantasy Star Online 2 takes a little bit more from the concept of we want it to be a little bit more fast-paced and still keeps a lot of the multiplayer aspect to a very specific group component. Groups are built in groups of 4, but you don't always have to go with other players. You actually have the ability in certain capacities based on skill, honestly, to actually completely play the game solo. As you can see in the video that we've provided, there are 4 people, but in most cases, those 3 other people in your party are AI controlled or are partners, basically, as they're actually called in the game. It also runs on the same consistent concept that Final Fantasy XI introduced, which is very I wouldn't say tradition at this. Well, it is more of a tradition at this point, but is very consistent. Where one character can play all of the classes. You have the ability to change at a table that allows you to simply change your class at any time, and then you also have the sub-job system, which allows you to level 2 separate classes at the same time, barring it's not one of the specialized classes, of which there are now currently 3 on the Japanese servers. But the baseline is that as a single character, you can gain access to all of the classes, all of the weapons, all of the techniques, and it gives you this ability to sort of have a very specific anime-based freedom that you wouldn't otherwise see in a lot of more traditional MMOs at the time. Or even now, it still stands above a lot of the other anime style based MMOs that exist on the market from Japan or Korea or China, for that matter, simply because of its innovations in the genre. Knowing that it has been able to sort of stand the test of time and has been able to give you the ability and that freedom of movement throughout each of the various levels that you go through. There are varying difficulties as well, so as you continue to play through the game, it gets harder and harder, which allows you to challenge yourself and your friends in larger groups, and including small raid-style battles that occur randomly throughout most of the content, specifically because it's called, so it's different depending on which version you're playing. In Japan, it's called an emergency quest. In America, they're calling them urgent quests, but it's the same concept where randomly throughout the day, a specific quest that is a raid-style battle that will allow up to a total of 12 players at any given time to go up against a very large single entity, or even like a control entity where you have to fight up against a number of waves of multiple enemies that culminate in a boss fight. The game itself is also popular enough across Japan as a baseline that it's had multiple collaborations with other series, including Hatsune Miku, Attack on Titan, Sonic, as is also a Sega game, as well as the most recently ending, the collab that just recently ended, which was actually with Sakura Wars. So the game itself and a lot of what it has to offer really speak to a bit more of a conceptual idea of, just because it is a small party doesn't mean that you still can't have a lot of fun and still have a way of being able to challenge yourself. So that being said, speaking of action combat, it's actually a really good segue. We'll move back over to Rob, who will be talking about Terra.
So this game right here, Terra, is at the time was one of the more unique MMORPGs that came out because of its live action combat style, which was, completely different from, the standard, turn-based, stat-based action combat that, you have in everything else from WoW to, Final Fantasy XI. And that is what drew me to the game at first. What kept me was just the amount of, how amazing the world was, how beautiful it was, and how well designed, the environments were, and the fact that no matter where I went, there was just always something that I could do. Whether it was, being in the giant capital cities, crafting items, or trying to chase that giant whale that's been flying around all over the world and you trying to land on its back, which I haven't done, but I've seen footage of people doing it, so props to you people. Other things I love about this game was, even though it's another Korean MMO, by the way, it had a very strong narrative, which most MMOs were only starting to pick up at that point in about, this game came out in 2011, I think. So yeah, this game's about coming up on being 9 years old now, and I'm still playing it to this day. So that's got to account for something. And it's also one of the few MMOs that got ported to consoles, and it was successfully ported, in that it didn't have wonky controls, it wasn't horribly unstable, and it was just fun and intuitive. Granted, it would have been nice if there was crossplay, but that is a concept that really wasn't moving along as smoothly as most people have thought, between Microsoft and Xbox and the PC market. What else about Terra that I really enjoy, though, was just the attention to detail. So, hopefully at some point we'll get a sequel, because as the game was, getting constant updates, it was more or less, kind of destroying the game as well, because they were streamlining things. They were making everything so that you can just get to end game quicker, which, where other games that have been out for even longer than Terra, they weren't doing stuff like this. Terra really wanted its players to get to the end game, so pretty much all you had to do was just complete story quests, and you could hit max level within like a couple of days, which was kind of a bummer. But the content was fun. The end game content was fun. The crafting system is very intuitive, which I really enjoyed. Upgrading your weapons, trying to grind for weapon parts to get your astral weapons. I think that's what they were called, Jen. I forget.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, astral weapons.
Well, it was Nexus, then it was Astral, then it's something else, and now it's another thing. It's like the thing about Terra is that it updated the way the weapons worked, kind of on a legendary system basis, kind of like what Guild Wars does.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so yeah. Then the combat is fun. One of the things, like I said, about the combat, I really enjoy those when you're in a party with people and you're raiding the dungeons, and you have some of the biggest bosses I've ever seen in MMOs. You got some normal enemies, some BAMs that are just running around, just waiting to be, fought. And it's just everything feels like an epic encounter, especially with the way the game's active combat is created. Just make the game very versatile, very mobile, very heavy input. Just lots of WASD double tapping for dodging and all that nonsense. Like, woo! The game keeps you on your toes, to be truthfully honest, and that's what I really like about it. It's a shame, though, that it has gone downhill with, like I said, with all those patches that streamlined the game. But at the end, it's still an enjoyable game. It still looks gorgeous to this day. It's still one of the prettiest MMOs I've ever seen. So it's definitely aged really well.
Let's be real truthful, though. One of the primary reasons why the game itself went downhill very quickly was the gender locking issue.
The gender locking with the new classes, yes, that's one of the biggest ones. And I'm actually kind of annoyed that 3 of the new classes are gender locked and race locked to the Elin.
I mean,
don't say it. Don't say it.
Korean. A, it's Korean, and B, they play to the market share. Honestly, a larger amount of the players on the US servers played either Kastanik or Ellen, and that is a fact. So the reason why those races got those classes was purely because that was what they were buying to that market share of. That was the whole sole reason for it. It's another reason why, like, Brawler as a class ended up being unlocked for most of the females, purely because of the fact that too many people were complaining about it not being available on specific races.
Mm-hmm.
But because of the fact that Brawler broke the tank balance, it just, like, it didn't make sense for anybody to play anything else. So for about 4 months, a lot of people dropped out of the game because Brawler was, like, the only class that people would take into dungeons to tank things instead of taking a warrior or a lancer.
Tank. It also was the DPS system, because you could see when it does the charging attack, it envelops like all those enemies there.
The issue is it wasn't that; it was the inherent problem with the uppercut. The Brawler had an uppercut move that would knock up, that would allow you to combo into a secondary attack that would put a hard knockdown stun on anything, including
even bosses.
Yeah, and that was inherently breaking the game, and a lot of people weren't having fun with it. Plus the whole aspect of how the PvP functions, it was basically take you completely out of the fight, and no one was.
And then the Valkyrie came out, and I forgave them. So, yep, and that's about all I have to say. So now we're going to turn it back over to Mark. We're about to hit the halfway point. So here he is with probably the second oldest game on the list. This is Ragnarok Online.
So, when people talk about their MMORPG experiences, I feel like one of the ways that is most illustrative to people who have never played a game before of what the game experience was like is to tell them about the most vivid memory you have of playing this sort of game. So when I talked about Final Fantasy XI, I brought up the Crawler's Nest because I was there for a month of my life. With Ragnarok Online, it's not a combat sequence or a zone that exists. Ragnarok is, as you can see from the visuals, sort of a standard by the numbers aesthetic, or by the numbers mechanically, isometric action RPG of sorts. It combined anime style with something of a Diablo aesthetic with what JRPGs or MMORPG, early MMORPGs were doing at the time, but in a way that was arguably more enjoyable than a lot of the stuff that was out at that point. But here is the thing that will always stick with me about Ragnarok Online. Ragnarok Online allowed you to have player-run shops where it would just be your little toon sitting out in the middle of town with a note over their head indicating whatever it was that they were selling. And the game had no real filter as it relates to the stuff that you would see in it. I don't know if it does now, but at the time that I was playing, there was not anybody doing anything to try and curtail like stupid behavior. Like myself and my friends who played in a guild that we all created called We Speak English
Oh,
Oh, good.
because most of the players didn't. And that was definitely, 20-year-old shitlord me, but also nobody fucking did anything about it. To give you an idea of how asleep at the wheel the mods were at this point.
Oh yeah.
So one day, my friend Joel and I go into a town, and there are various vendors. And the one vendor to this day I will never forget, just sitting right in the middle of town with the little text bubble over her head that just said, "Buy milk from my boobs."
and
And all she was selling was
Yeah.
milk. All she was selling was milk.
I think that feels like it speaks to the actual aesthetic of the time, though. Like a lot
Mhm.
of people that played that game were like, a lot of people that played that game were like that. I feel.
Oh yeah, that game was that game. Once you got beyond a certain point in it, it was kind of the shits to play. But for the first like 40 or 50 hours, it was quite enjoyable.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
quite enjoyed the aesthetic of the game. The way that the mechanics felt was quite nice. But if I talk about Ragnarok Online in any meaningful way, it's not going to be to discuss the gameplay. It's not going to be to discuss the aesthetics. It's buy milk from my boobs.
I'm health from my boobs. Okay,
From my
good.
boobs.
From my
That's all I
boobs.
got. So to move this show along here, let us move on to Miss Jan once again, who will be talking about another game that I have lost a good couple of years of my life to, Final Fantasy 14.
So, in the vein of Square Enix trying to make good on the promise of another MMO hot on the heels of what they did with Final Fantasy XI, Final Fantasy XIV originally came out as just Final Fantasy XIV Online, affectionately known now to those who are in the know as 1.0. It was a disaster, a hot mess to say the least. The gameplay, the crafting, the systems, everything was just very clunky and very sordid and very sad. And a lot of it was just because of them trying to emulate a lot of what they had with 11 and a lot of the popularity of, at the time, other games in the genre, most notably World of Warcraft. The the issues very, very heavily outweighed the story, which was, for the time, actually fairly decent. Also, not voice acted as it is now, but the baseline was very similar. Once they realized that things just weren't working and the game itself was doomed to abject failure, the original group of developers were absolutely shit canned, and they brought in a gentleman who is very passionately and very fondly known as Yoshi P. Yoshida-san came in and utterly just completely redid the entirety of Final Fantasy XIV, as now is known as A Realm Reborn. Um, if you were a player of 1.0, there were specific titles and specific extras that you got as a person who played in the original version to sort of show how things exist. In fact, there's even an opening cutscene that you get as a legacy player that is completely different from those who were not part of the original version of the game. Which sort of speak to how the game itself has changed and things of that nature. But as it stands now, the game itself played very similar to other games of the time. It's very tab target based. It's not action combat like the last couple of games we were talking about. It is very traditional MMO at its core. You have parties of now again. This also speaks to the same style of things that I've noted that I would always note that are different from a traditional MMO versus a Japanese MMO. A traditional MMO generally is parties of 5, whereas with a Japanese MMO, it's traditionally parties of 4. This is something you can see in 11, PSO2. This is something that you can see in 14. So this 4-party system really seemed to be like a very commonality amongst most of these games, as is the number 12, as is generally stated with a lot of other things. The only major difference between, say, 14 and the other MMOs is that its larger alliance or raid system is an 8-man party versus a 12-man party, but that's sort of. I feel like the lesser number ended up working out a little bit better because I believe in the original 1.0 they actually did have 12 and it was really crazy and wonky and bad. That being said, 14 itself now has catered itself because of its story. The initial stories through Realm Reborn up until its post-patch content leading into its first expansion, Heavensward, was a little clunky and is actually being streamlined in its future patches to make it a lot more streamlined and a lot easier to try to make it through the original Realm Reborn content. But at the time, the story is still and foremost is one of the main reasons why it stands out as more of a Final Fantasy RPG versus an actual traditional MMO. Most times in a traditional MMO, you're going to go through, you've got a guy, you get a text box that tells you what happens, and you continue on with the quote unquote storyline to continue your progress through the game. 14 took a completely different approach and made itself stand out in a much more specific fashion by basically stating, hey, yeah, by the way, this is very much more a traditional RPG, like a JRPG, than it is an actual MMO, purely because you have the ability to play with other players. But the baseline is that the game itself is first and foremost about the storyline, making your character known as the Warrior of Light, going through with the trials and tribulations of the Science of the Seventh Dawn, and trying to make your way through all of the prevalent story as you go through each of the expansions. The game itself has stood out much more and is very still standing the test of time as an MMO of great rapport with a lot of the community, so much so that it is touted generally as the number one MMO to play right now, purely just based on player base and content alone. While it may not have the base traditional PvP system that you would be used to, the PvP that it does tout is much different and tends to be a lot. It's looked on a lot more fondly than it is in most other MMOs, simply just because of the way it actually integrates the content in for PvP. While it's controlled in a very different way that I am not a very big fan of, and I don't want to get into in this video or this at this time, just because I could go on for hours about how ludicrous it actually is. The concept of how it works is definitely worth your time to at least give it a shot. But overall, as a baseline game, is one of the more recent games that have been out, and for its tenure is still easily one of the best games that can and does exist in the current MMO market to date. So that being said, we're going to talk about other newer MMOs. We'll move back over to Rob and talk about Elder Scrolls Online.
So much of what Jan said in regards to the launch of Final Fantasy XIV can easily be applied to the launch of Elder Scrolls Online. That when the game came out, it was an absolute tragedy. It was not a very well functioning game. It was easily abused and it just didn't function right. Way too buggy of a game. And it felt like an uninspired MMO knockoff of multiple other MMOs, just in an Elder Scrolls skin. The thing about Elder Scroll Online is that the concept of wanting to exist in the world of Tamriel or Cyrodiil has gone back as far as Morrowind on the PC and the original Xbox. There are, in fact, even mods for Morrowind and Skyrim that will allow people to play online together. So, the idea of wanting to run around and experience the world of, Vanderfell or Elsewhere or Cyrodiil or going back to Daggerfall is something people have been begging for years. So, when a division in Blizzard or Bethesda's parent company sets up an online division dedicated to just making online-only games, the first game announced, Elder Scrolls Online, you can understand that the hype was really high and the expectations were really high. So, you can understand that they were scrambling really fast and really hard to fix a game that should have met expectations upon launch. So, and however, unlike, with what they did with Final Fantasy XIV, where they literally just scrapped the game and started out fresh, they pretty much fixed the game with every patch, with every expansion, starting with Morrowind and then Somerset, and then they have another expansion coming out in a couple of months, releasing Elsewhere last year for the game. It is probably one of the biggest turnarounds I've ever seen for an MMO, and to this day, it is probably one of the most engrossing games I have ever played now. I mean, sure, I was, going crazy when I was talking about, how much I love Terra. Elder Scrolls is the same thing, and I've always wanted to experience, the world of Cyrodiil in all its glory. Revisit, the heydays of Daggerfall. Run back up Red Mountain, up in Morrowind, maybe revisit the capital city, do a little bit of combat to win wars for factions and whatnot. I also really enjoy the fact that they have a really interesting single-player story element that they've added to the game to make it still feel at home with the Elder Scrolls franchise. I love how they're very respectful to the game's lore and canon, having it take place 1,000 years before the events of any of the current main title Elder Scroll games, and the fact that they also bring in they don't just stop with just the content they that we have seen already beforehand. They bring in new content constantly, going at it with people like Molag Bal or other Daedric entities. It's just a really well-crafted game that just took a while for them to get off their ass and to make it a good game. There are some issues that I do have, like player builds and stuff like that. You can easily make an overpowering warrior that will practically trump, the 90% of the enemies that you come across, or even other players if you're doing PvP. Some classes are absolutely not viable whatsoever in this game, so there's still a little bit of balance issue that they have with this game, but it's definitely a lot better than it was when this game came out 7 years ago. Other things that I absolutely enjoy is I just love the look of the game and how it perfectly captures the world of, the Elder Scrolls franchise. It looks like it easily fits in there with, all the mainstay games. It looks, actually, in my opinion, it looks better than Skyrim. And Skyrim is still a good looking game to this day, even when if you exclude all the mods, by the way. Which, by the way, I'm actually shocked to see that this game is one of the few MMOs that allows external mod use. So, like, you want to enhance your UI in any way, shape, or form, or you want to enhance your inventory system or your map system, compasses, certain things, that little touches that they'll allow you to modify, which makes this a much better experience. Because let's be honest, some of the things they still haven't fixed, like their compass system or their tracking system for quests, to this day you still haven't fixed it, Bethesda.net. Aside from that, this is definitely a game I think people should at least try and experience once. I don't think at this point in time you will be disappointed with playing it. It's a lot of fun. If you tried playing it 7 years ago, man, then God bless you if you're still with it, and that you were along for the ride. And if you got off the boat early, then you know what? I don't blame you, because they didn't really give you a whole lot of incentive to stay for a while. So, having said that, we're going to move on to Mark and his last game of the list that he's going to be talking about, and that is City of Heroes.
So if you looked at the visuals of City of Heroes there, and you were kind of like, wait, isn't that WoW? You wouldn't be the first person to make that sort of mistake on first blush. There has kind of been this very specific evolution towards doing MMORPGs this way since the early 2000s, and I don't know which game specifically did it first, but this was the game that I played first before I played WoW. And I honestly think that this game, more than any other, is the reason why I personally don't particularly think very much of WoW as an experience. Mechanically, it plays like WoW does to a certain extent, which means if you've played this, if you've played WoW, if you've played Final Fantasy XIV, you have a functional idea of how all of these games work if you've played any one of them. Your character has different skills that they unlock that are mapped to individual buttons. You push the button when you want to use the skill, the thing happens. As you get more powerful, more skills are unlocked relative to the class that you have picked, blah, 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 blah. What makes City of Heroes unique is the superhero aesthetic that is tied into it. Now, superhero MMORPGs are kind of a rare bird. Outside of City of Heroes, you have DC Universe Online, which still exists, and a game that was made by Marvel Superheroes or something to that effect, that was shit canned like 2 years ago. So it's
Champions Online.
Yeah, Champions Online. So thank you. So it's not exactly what I would call a well-trod ground as far as this sort of subgenre of MMORPG goes, and that's kind of a shame, because I really do like the idea of creating your own superhero or your own supervillain and having them do whatever. But City of Heroes did also kind of set the template for how this was going to work. The developers of the game sat down and sort of boiled superhuman powers down to a set of base job types that you could have that also worked within the confines of being an MMORPG. So you had like your long-range characters who could, fire at enemies from a distance. You had tank characters who could take an absolute shit-kicking. You had controller characters who could manipulate the field of battle as deemed appropriate, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It was all stuff that very much mapped to the idea of how an MMO worked, while also mapping to how we perceive superhuman characters to be in superhero stories. What was really unique and interesting about City of Heroes, though, is that, and I think this is to the game's detriment as much as it is to the game's benefit, you could completely customize the aesthetic of your character from jump and make them look like whatever superhero you wanted them to look like. Now, of course, there's the people who would be like, I'm going to create Wolverine or I'm going to create Spider-Man, but like that wasn't the best part of it. The best part of it was being like, I want to make an awesome fucking superhero and making your superhero the way that you wanted your superhero to look. It it was great. It was really fucking fun if you had a little bit of imagination for what kind of a superhero you wanted yourself to be or you wanted to create, and it really rewarded creativity. I think that ultimately kind of boils down to the negatives as well, unfortunately, because games like WoW and Final Fantasies 11 and 14 and so on and so forth, at least for a while, relied very heavily on the idea of having awesome looking gear at later levels. Whereas, I mean, now Final Fantasy 14 is exclusively the cosmetics game. Like the end game of that isn't raiding. The end game is customizing your fucking cosmetics.
Well,
Let's
how's
call that what it is. But City of Heroes was kind of, you would just design your character and that would be it. There wasn't like, there was some aesthetic variance to your superpowers, but your character didn't necessarily have an aesthetic change as you progress through the game. And I think for some people that kind of hurt. At the end of the day, City of Heroes didn't mechanically evolve as much as other games in the MMORPG genre have over time, and that ultimately is probably what took it down more than anything else. But I do feel like, honestly, I there is definitely something to be said for maybe somebody else giving this sort of genre or subgenre of MMOs another try, just because it was fucking awesome as hell to be a superhero or a supervillain for that matter, and just being able to build your character, build their aesthetic, design what they were going to be, and bringing them out into the in-game universe with all of your other superheroes. It was fucking great. It was a lot of fun, and it's one of the few games here that I've played in any case that made a significant impact based on its aesthetic uniqueness rather than like, it's systemic stuff, if that makes sense. Like, it's not like everything else here. Like, everything else that we've talked about has kind of been quasi medieval to a certain extent, and this is decidedly not. And with that, we will move on to Jan's last game of the evening, which would be the aforementioned World of Warcraft.
Where do I begin?
Oh boy.
World of Warcraft coming hot on the heels of EverQuest. The original designers and people who tested this game were from what EverQuest used to call Uber Guilds. Uber Guilds were large guilds of people that rated high-end content throughout most of EverQuest based on just them being high-tier players. This gave the developers of World of Warcraft, Blizzard Entertainment, the ability to create an MMO that was unlike any other. The concept behind it was to take the Warcraft universe that they had so delicately put together amongst multiple RTS games and turn it into an actual multiplayer role-playing extravaganza. The basis of why the game became so popular, partly because of its much more aesthetically cartoony style. And I use cartoony because there really isn't any other word that I can use to really describe how this game actually looks. Aesthetically, the game itself had very clunky models to begin with. But again, this is, we're talking, 2003, 2004, like very early on in the life cycle of MMOs as a genre in the first place, and coming off of the success of EverQuest, it took a lot of what the game made popular and made powerful and turned it into something even much more of a phenomenon outside of what you would normally have received from the genre, leading into this. prior to this, the only other games that we had that were in the same contextual space were games like Asheron's Call and Dark Age of Camelot. They were all in a 3D environment. They required 3D accelerated graphics, things that people just weren't really sure that they could get or had to get special graphics cards in order to actually play. And because of that, the genre itself is where sort of why WoW was able to innovate and why WoW became such a figurehead. The Warcraft world and the Warcraft universe as a baseline, and obviously, pre-Activision purchase of Blizzard Entertainment created something that was timeless for people. The concept of what the game itself had to offer wasn't something that a lot of people really thought of as doable at the time. There were also a large, and I'd say large because this World of Warcraft came out around the same time as I believe we actually talked about this on your podcast a couple of years ago, Mark. World of Warcraft came out at a time where there was a boom in MMOs. So you had games like Matrix Online, Anarchy Online, Final Fantasy 11. There was a large number of multiplayer online RPG style games that were literally all coming out at the exact same time. And a lot of people were trying to buy into this EverQuest high, so to speak. But the only one that was really innovating at the time was WoW and 11. And the issue with 11, though, and I know that you touched on it a little bit, was the conceptual ick, I guess is the word I'm looking for, of what EverQuest brought to the table. Because a lot of people were trying to basically like, hey, look, we're going to make an EverQuest style MMO, but we're going to put our own spin on it. And then we're going to kind of flare it how we want it to be so that it's a little bit more ours, I guess, is the way to really put it. World of Warcraft took the concept of what EverQuest was and did everything they could to try to make it better. It's by taking an open world environment and removing loading zones, taking an open world environment and creating instanced areas, something that EverQuest didn't even innovate into until Lost Dungeons of Norath, which was like its 6th or 7th expansion. It was I think there's like 30 expansions for the game now, but that's beside the point. EverQuest had a baseline. It knew where it came from. It knew its roots. Meridian 59 was definitely its starting point. It was trying its best to do everything it could to beat out the isometric MMO, Ultima Online, and did so with relative ease, honestly. And while Ultima Online was still a very popular MMO at the time, EverQuest innovated in its entirety based on its 3D engine. The same thing could be said about World of Warcraft. World of Warcraft created a large, and I mean large, pool of copiers and imitators, and in certain instances, innovators. People that wanted to be able to make games that were just as popular in that genre. Games like Ion, games like Rift, games like ArcAge, where they all tried to take that idea of what WoW was and take it another step further. If you think about MMOs today, one of the top 3 games you're going to think about is WoW, and that's purely just because of its existence in pop culture, its existence in mainstream media, its iconic ideal of taking a genre of games that a lot of people were stigmatizing at the time to making it much more accessible and mainstream for the player bases that really honestly didn't think that it would be something that they want to play, but making it something easily understandable and easily playable by anybody. And I really feel like that while it's very conceptualization was sort of frowned upon at the time, you've got games like Final Fantasy 14 and Star Wars of the Old Republic and ESO and oh man, the list goes on and on and on and on. But the progenitor of the popularity of MMOs after EverQuest, you're gonna think of World of Warcraft. There just isn't anything else that you could really say about the genre as a whole without first thinking about how the sort of chain of consistency and the chain of updates occurs without accrediting WoW in some capacity. It's just I don't even know that that would be possible, purely just because of what it is that Blizzard did with the game as a whole. Um, that being said, we'll go ahead and finish up with the final game of our top 10 list. We'll go back over to Rob, who will finish with Guild Wars 2.
Hi, it's me again. So, before we wrap up talking about Guild Wars 2, I do want to take a minute to rename the list for anybody that just now tuned in. Again, this is not in any ascending or descending order. We don't have a game that we say is better than the other, although I'm sure there are some. First game we mentioned was Granado Espada, Sword of the New World, Final Fantasy XI, Phantasy Star Online 2, Terra, Ragnarok Online, Final Fantasy XIV, A Realm Reborn, Elder Scrolls Online, City of Heroes, plus expansions, and World of Warcraft, which Jan just talked about. So that leads us to our last game of the night, and that is Guild Wars 2. This is a very interesting game because as a sequel, it changed everything about its gameplay from the first. The first Guild Wars game was more of an instant-based, like action-adventure hybrid style MMO, although it wasn't really an MMO in the same vein as, some games like WoW are, because again, it was all a bunch of zones that were connected by hub worlds, but those hub worlds were the only way you were going to interact with other players. The game also had a very big push for their combat 8-on-8 player versus player arenas, hence the birth of ArenaNet, of course. And the thing that Guild Wars 1 did also was, dual classing, which was an interesting concept at the time that I don't think really any other MMO or online RPG did at the time. So, like, if I wanted to be a cleric and a warrior class, you can do that. If you want to be a mesmer or a ranger, you can do that. You can come up with some interesting combinations, but they were pretty bad. The thing about Guild Wars 2 is it decided to get away from that style of gameplay. So there's no more dual classing. They decided to up the number of races that you can play as, which, gave the game a much more organic feel to it, along with the fact that it's now open world instead of just being connected by zones and hub worlds. Other things that made it feel great was the revived combat system, which was leagues better than its predecessor. Still kind of like an action RPG hybrid, not in the same vein as Terra, but definitely more mobile and playable than something like WoW or Final Fantasy XIV was. And some things that I think Guild Wars 2 is also the first of is they introduced seasonal content. So, after they released their first two expansions, Path of Fire, and I forget the other one all of a sudden, they started releasing regular content updates in the form of seasons. And then other MMOs, took that idea and ran with it. So it has this huge impact on the genre already with how it delivers content. And several years later, this game is still delivering, seasonal content updates. It's keeping players, its fan base engrossed heavily in the game with not just, raids or event boss world fights and whatnot. It's just doing a lot of things right, and it's still doing it several years later, which makes it, a very immersive game. On top of that, like I've said in all the other games, like this game is gorgeous. Like to this day, it's like just like Terra and some other games. This game is just gorgeous, and it's got a beautiful, vibrant world. Other things that I love about Guild Wars 2 is its story elements, with its chapters, its heroes events, and it's just a very fun game to play overall. There are some issues I have, and that's the fact that the PvP system, which while was fun in the first game, kind of takes a back seat in this game. I mean, it's still there, and they have ways that you can play, and but you can create builds that are just either too overpowered or just not powered enough. So it's like it makes the game a little bit unbalanced in the PvP segment. To this day, though, I have to say that Guild Wars is probably my favorite MMORPG. I'm happy it made the list too, because I wasn't sure. I mean, Jan, you were a fan of the game? I forget.
Yeah, no. So I have played both the Guild Wars games, and while Guild Wars 1 is much more akin to the Phantasy Star Online style of gameplay, which is small instance grouped, sort of lobby-based maps. Guild Wars 2 was much more MMO specific. I had two major issues with the way Guild Wars 2 did things, and two major positives. The two major drawbacks that I have with the game is that the living world content, which is the episodic seasonal content, it's the same issue I have with PSO2, by the way. The living world episodic content does not allow you to go back to interact with it once you get past a certain point. You just skip it entirely now, especially with, I think, its third actual full expansion pack out. The real major issue also, besides that, is the way that Guild Wars tried to do both action and standard MMO combat. It has a role system, which is kind of the same concept as what you could do with Terra. And not like ROLE, I'm saying roll as in ROLL. So it has a dodge mechanic within the game that allows you to specifically double tap or like shift tap a direction to dodge out of the way of specific attacks at a specific time. However, it does not work for every attack. It only works for very specific portions of the combat. The other real positive about the game, though, is that the content as a baseline was built around the seasonal quote unquote living world, which is basically their way of saying main story quest. While I enjoyed what Guild Wars 2 did with its story as it was basically original, in order for you to understand how certain amounts of the story functions or even works in further and later expansions, if you didn't take part in the actual living world when it was originally live, none of it makes any fucking sense. And it's convoluted as fuck. And I'm not kidding. The only way that you can relive certain aspects of the actual living world is to simply read about it. And that I hate that shit. Stop it. Let me play the fucking content. I paid the fucking money to buy this game. Let me fucking play it. Don't make me just read a fucking novel about it. That's boring as fuck. I don't want my continuous... This is the same issue I have with WoW, by the way. Just FYI. There is always going to be a certain amount of story-based content that is locked behind a novel. And I'm not even joking. And the problem with that is that inherently I am paying a premium price to play your game, regardless of if it's pay-to-play or free-to-play, and I don't have any idea as to some characters or why these characters even fucking exist in your game. I just don't know. I don't know why this character's here. I don't understand why this character is talked about in other conversations. I don't even know why certain characters are fucking frowned upon. I'm just well, that character sounded cool. I was oh no, they were an evil bad guy. Wait, what? Excuse me? Huh? So that fundamental problem with Guild Wars 2 is like my only drawback. Well, that and the legendary weapon system. Let me get that fucking out of the way. But like, there's content in this game that is gorgeous and really well thought out and very fun to play through. And then there's content that you don't have access to anymore, which fucking sucks. And I'm like, this was and again, this is an ArenaNet / NCSoft thing that happened also with City of, I might add. Specific pieces of content could only be played once, and only when it was originally live. And then once that event was done, you never saw it again, ever. They just took it out and they gave you a textbook about what happened. And I feel like that while a living game is nice in the context, having the ability, and this is to Star Wars The Old Republic credit, you can play through a single player variant of the content to actually gain context as to what happened previously in the story, which is another thing that I'm glad that PSO2 also does, but I'm kind of digressing. The baseline is that while Guild Wars 2 was a very popular and very powerful concept, some of the reasons why the player base dipped as quickly as it did, and why those who remain are those who are dedicated to the game, basically all agree that there are specific pieces of content and specific pieces of the game that probably would have been better if they kept it or available for newer players. And it makes it more difficult for newer players to come into the actual game to enjoy it at its fullest. And I feel like to its detriment, it would be better to have specific extras added in. But the rest of it was basically just like, this is sort of what I feel would have made this game much more popular, and probably in a baseline could have made this game contend. Also, the original endgame prior to its first expansion was absolute trash, but that's sort of beside the point. I enjoy Guild Wars 2. I would love to have been able to go back to it, but because of ArenaNet's fucking ridiculous hacking policies, I will never be able to play this game again. So that is just sort of the way it works.
Oh, so I see that you love the game just as much as I do, Chan.
Absolutely. I used to have okay, so to my credit, I made a really funny fucking character, and another part is I'm pissed off because of how they nerfed engineer. But I made a Sylvari engineer whose primary DPS was flamethrower.
So the plant person was running around with the flamethrower, huh?
She was a fire flower.
Oh. Did she at least have a red getup?
Yes,
with
she was
blue overalls.
Red. She was not a Mario clone. Get the fuck out of here.
I thought that's what.
But
you were doing.
She was. No, her name was Ember Lily, and she basically was a fire flower. I thought it was fucking funny.
Oh well. But hey, there you have it, guys. That's our 10 games right there. No particular order of our top 10 MMORPGs that we have all played. Again, that list goes like this. First game, Granado Espada, Sword of the New World, a Victorian-era style MMORPG from Korea. Very grind heavy. We have Final Fantasy XI that came out on the PS2 and PC and, ported to the Xbox 360, but nobody cared about it. We have Phantasy Star Online 2, which is now making its way into the U.S. market as we speak. PC release coming out next week. Terra, which is a very action-heavy oriented MMORPG that also had a successful port to the console many years after its release, though. And a lot of fun still to this day. Ragnarok Online, which is probably the oldest game on this list. A anime-style MMO that is all right by today's standards. To be truthfully honest, it didn't age as well as some of the other MMOs. We got Final Fantasy XIV, which is probably the youngest out of all the MMOs right here on this list. A lot of fun. Jan and Mark can credit to wasting many years of their life to this game already. Whoops! That's the wrong button.
That's the wrong scheme.
There's the screen. There it is. Come back. Come back. Wow, it's loading slow. After that, we have Elder Scrolls Online, which was a game that, had a dismal launch and came back strong, providing good content, good updates, becoming a solid MMO after a while. We have City of Heroes that was pretty much the game that allowed you to play become a badass superhero or badass villain. Sadly, it was shut down, but there are private servers that you can play this game on. World of Warcraft, Jan just went on a spiel about that, and Guild Wars 2, which we just now talked about. So, maybe we can just take a couple minutes right now to mention some fond memories of, like, maybe an event that happened while playing an MMO. So, how about we start with you, Mark? Any of the games on this list that you have a fond memory of that you'd like to share?
Buy milk from my boobs.
Buy milk from my boobs.
For the people who are just tuning in, Mark, can you explain that
No.
again real quick? No.
No,
No.
they don't give context.
You
anymore.
should have fucking been here when I told that story. Fuck you. Buy milk from my boobs, you piece of shit.
So I see Mark is going to go the same route as Guild Wars 2 Seasonal Living World updates. He should have been here to experience it.
Exactly.
All right. How about you, Jan? Do you have a memory?
Maybe, I think, damn, I've played literally all of the games that we have on this list, so it's like hard for me to kind of say one or the other. I think the most memorable thing I would have to be, oh no, I know fucking Jesus Christ, 18-hour fucking corpse camp in Final Fantasy 11. I am not even ridiculously exaggerating that number. It was a literal 18-hour corpse camp waiting on the other side of a zone line because some fuck up piece of shit like asshole decided, hey, I got a great idea. I am gonna just simply make sure that this one fucking group of 3 Mandragoras is gonna sit on the fucking borderline so nobody can get their bodies for like 2 weeks. And I'm like, nah, fam. Finally, we had like a bunch of like 55s roll through and finally fucking murder them for us. But yeah, no, 18-hour wait to get our bodies back. Oh my god, that was when I say that Final Fantasy XI worked in real time, it literally did. To be able to craft the AF armor, the artifact armor, which was some of the better armor in the game for your characters when it first came out, like the first 2 expansions. It literally took anywhere between 24 to 48 actual real-time hours for the game to actually craft the item for you before you could pick it up. Like, the game worked in real time. It was absolutely ludicrous. But goddamn was it rewarding when you finally got that shit.
Actually, no, I have a Final Fantasy XI story.
Okay.
Oh, good. I can't wait.
Fucking the island of Qufim.
The PTSD!
I have joined up in a group with a couple of other players, and we're waiting on a DPS. And all of a sudden, the DPS comes running towards us. Doesn't say anything, just comes running towards us with like 3 fucking giants attached to her.
Oh, good.
So we are sufficiently far enough away from the zone that all of these fucking things, like if you get something like that happens, like something, your general expectation at that point is either eat shit and take that death, or get it to a zone that's not going to fucking kill everyone. This person brings all of them to us, so it is going to murder our party. That's just going to happen because she pissed them off, and it's going to come after all of us. So I tell everybody to zone, because I'm the tank. I fucking throw Provoke down and fucking throw up my 2-hour. They kill me anyway, but I managed to keep the rest of the party from eating shit. All this person says was, "I'm sorry, it was an accident." To which I respond was, "I'm pretty sure that's what your parents said about you." So that lost us a party member.
Wow.
For me, I didn't I mean, when I played MMOs, I didn't go like too hardcore into them until about Terra came out. So one concept I didn't exactly understand was the world boss concept. So I'm running around on Terra with a friend of mine, and all of a sudden there's this big announcement saying a world boss has appeared just outside of a town. I'm like, oh, let's go check this out. Uh, Now, granted, I would have to say this is when did the concept of the world boss appear? It came out with World of Warcraft's Cataclysm, right? With the boss that travels around the world and lands at various locations, correct?
World bosses. Okay, so there's a distinct difference between a world boss and a boss that travels the world. A world boss in WoW was definitely something that was not the first. If you're talking like quote unquote world bosses, then go back to EverQuest. Because that was basically how bosses spawned.
Well, like an
They were
event
just
boss.
in the open world. Like an event boss,
Like he
yeah,
just
WoW was definitely. You're talking about Deathwing. Deathwing wasn't Deathwing was a raid boss, but not a world boss. He was simply just a boss that flew across the world and burnt you to death if you were in the wrong zone.
okay.
World bosses in World of Warcraft was basically like the dragons that would spawn on the portals to the Emerald Dream or Lord Kazakh and shit. Like those were world bosses, but that was World of Warcraft.
Okay, well
Like vanilla.
the way this boss was designed in Terra was apparently he can land, and this was back in vanilla Terra. So he showed up in random locations outside of certain towns and whatnot, and we decided, hey, you know what? We're about level 30. Why don't we go and join the party? No, that was a bad idea. I mean, there was definitely like 50 or 60 people going at it, which brought my computer to a crawl back then. My poor PC and
Oh, you're probably thinking about like Encourage. That was end of I know that was a big event that happened that created a full like server crash in vanilla towards the end of it, right before BC.
But yeah, but the Black Dragon, he pretty much laid waste to me and my friend. I mean, we tried to stick it out. But it's like being my first world boss event or whatever you want to classify him as. To be truthfully honest, it didn't go well. However, years later now that they're kind of like a common thing that I actually prepare for. So like in Guild Wars 2. I go out and of course I'm fighting like event dragon bosses that require like a good group of like 80 other players and whatnot, and I'm actually able to smart enough now to turn down graphical settings so my PC isn't crashing from the amount of craziness that's going on. So I mean, those are my memories right there. Actually, I think I have that dragon boss raid saved on this stream somewhere from like it's from last year as a matter of fact, so I should probably link it and show it. You get a good laugh.
I'm sure.
Yeah, but yeah, so that's about it. I want to thank everybody for tuning in and joining us. Sorry you missed it. You should have been here, you motherfuckers. I want to thank Jan and Mark for providing commentary as always for the topics and helping me out with the list. Thank you, you two.
Totally.
Of course.
All right. And to everybody out there, I want to wish you all good night. Deuces.